Welcome to the first episode of Housing People, a new show by Inside Housing about the extraordinary people who work in housing. I'm Sasha Deepwell, Chief Executive of Valley Homes.
And I'm Olu and Sasha. I'm a director at consultancy Altair. I'm also the co-founder of Leadership 2025. In a minute, we're going to be introducing you to our first interview for this series, Violet Pugh. Violet is Digital Marketing Manager at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and she chairs the ethnicity colleague called Network Group.
Violet was one of the inspirations for starting Housing People. Olu and I came across her when judging the Women in Housing Awards 2021, where she won one of the categories to become Woman of the Year. We were just blown away by the stories of all the entrants, the inspiring work that so many had put into their applications. And nobody gets to see it apart from the judges. And we thought, what a waste. We need to tell their stories to a wider audience because there's nothing more important in housing than the people.
Wow, it's like a year now. Gosh, I've sort of still get the warm glow reading through all those citations. And I can remember, Sasha, how inspired we were. I think at the time we saw a lot of wonderful work being undertaken by people working in the housing association sector. And I think, if I recall correctly, we felt it was an opportunity to get some of them that were not being noticed, an opportunity to actually get people to talk about themselves, talk about all the wonderful things they're doing. And in some ways, I think in the current climate, to really champion colleagues that are doing outstanding work in the sector.
Violet. So the first question really is just, who is Violet Pugh? That's the key question. Not the super impressive, super achiever that everybody in Metropolitan Valley knows about. The real one. That's what we want to know. Not the polished version.
Not the polished version. Oh dear, I don't think you want to see the unpolished version. I'm not sure about that. I might have to censor the conversation.
Okay.
But no, thanks again for having me. I mean, I'm the oldest of four children. And I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I've been living in London for about 25, 26 years or so. And I kind of always consider myself as Zimbabwean at heart and a Londoner at the same time. So I often hate, when people say to me, "Oh, you're British." It's like, yeah, I'm a Londoner, but I feel really Zimbabwean in my heart, But also at the same time, I have a real affinity for British culture because I've grown up here for most of my adult life. And I suppose growing up, I sort of had a sort of slightly unusual way of being raised. I was I think so anyway, but I was collectively raised by my maternal grandmother, my auntie Primrose, who's my mum's younger sister, and my uncle Marvelous. It's a real name, and he's pretty marvelous, and who's my mum's younger brother, as well as my mum as well. So as I said, I've kind of, grown up partly in Zimbabwe and partly over here in London. So yeah, I had a very sort of a small circle of really sort of important people in my life, all sort of collectively raising me to, I guess, be the person that I am today. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the sort of background of who I am. I also have a Jack Russell. So most people who know me know I'm a bit barking mad about dogs. I've got a 2-year-old Jack Russell. His name's Marvelous, named after my uncle Marvelous, who unfortunately passed away, God rest his soul. But yeah, he's pretty marvelous, but spends most of his time being mischievous, really. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
So Violet, that's great. That's really painted a fabulous picture of your background. So what actually got you into social housing? How did you find out about the sector and what inspired you to work in it?
Sure. I mean, I've been working in marketing and communications for about 14 years overall, and mainly in property and sort of retail brands. And when I say property, it's kind of private sector estate agency brands. And I began my sort of career in retail fashion and beauty and spent a few years in PR. Then I moved into marketing. I didn't necessarily intentionally plan a career in marketing because I I'd always been a bit sort of somewhat creative, and I loved writing, and always thought I would end up with a career in journalism, but clearly that didn't work out because my mom told me to go and get a real job, which in her mind marketing still isn't, unless you're a doctor or a scientist or a lawyer or something of that nature, but much to her disappointment. But anyway, story for another day. And yeah, so I got into housing really by accident, to be honest. It was about 7 years ago now. And I'd lost my job at the time, unfortunately, and that was a very difficult time for me because I would like to say that I wouldn't say I'm a workaholic, but I'm a very naturally driven and ambitious person, probably partly to do with my upbringing and how I was raised, and that sort of work ethic in me. So, a job and how much we attach our identity to our jobs is, in general, is something that kind of really struck me quite strongly about 6-7 years ago. So when I lost my job and I was sort of trying to find my feet, just really pick myself back up again because I didn't quite know what to do. Marketing and comms is all I knew. I really started to kind of, I suppose, rebuild my confidence after that sort of time that wasn't a very positive one for myself. And I sort of developed my own little dog walking business at the time, which was doing fairly successfully, I would say. And this is at the time before COVID hit, obviously, and dog walking and the dog business wasn't booming as much as it was. I kind of wish I'd stayed in it now. I've been making so much more money than I am now, but anyway. So I did that for a little while, just trying to find my feet, and that was a really interesting experience. And to be honest, it was a time for me to just rethink about what my future was going to be next in terms of my career. I hadn't really planned on going back into property, and hadn't really necessarily planned to sort of stop my dog walking business, but I was approached by a recruiter at the time, and there was a job that was going at Notting Hill Genesis as a marketing campaigns manager. For a brief while, and it sort of piqued my interest because whilst I obviously started my own little business and I was doing okay, broken even, but I wasn't making quite as much profit as I would have liked, or fast enough. And obviously you've got to live, you've got bills to pay. It sort of interested me to kind of potentially explore the idea, mainly for a financial reason, but also the more I started to talk to a few of my friends, and I remember specifically one of my friends at the time said to me, working in housing is probably something that really suits you. I sort of feel like this might be your calling. And I said, oh, why is that? Because, well, you've often worked in environments where you're typically, because we used to work together for the same company, where you're probably one of, a handful of Black people. And I know kind of some of the challenges that we sort of spoke about and that I've gone through because of that. It has its benefits in some ways, but for the most part, it was challenging being one of the handful. Plus also she mentioned that, I guess my experience from a private sector point of view would have been quite valuable working within the world of housing. So, why don't you just give it a go? And I said, okay. Well, I'm not so sure, because I have to say, I admit I was one of those people that would probably had this kind of stigma associated with housing associations. So I didn't really quite know what to expect, but I thought, you know what, I've got nothing to lose. I need some extra cash, just go for it and do it. And honestly, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I haven't looked back since, because although I didn't realize it at the time that housing was probably what I felt was my calling. Now that I'm in it, sort of 6-7 years later, I really feel at home here. I'm lucky enough that I work for Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, and for me, an organisation that's really rooted in strong values that align with kind of what is important to me. And as I said, I've sort of previously worked in other organizations, where sort of diversity and inclusion is not part of their cultural DNA, and that can be quite a challenge. So I sort of feel like I'm in a place where I can make a difference. I can see what I do making a difference. It's also very diverse. I know that might feel like it's not very diverse, but I would say that we're miles ahead above other sectors for sure. So and I also feel like actually housing just in general is just an interesting industry. There's so many facets to it, and I'm still learning so much. So I really feel at home. But yeah, that was my story. That's how I got into it. It was all an accident, but it was a very beautiful accident that was waiting to happen.
Good, interesting. So will you consider the circumstances around you, the job you lost, and setting up your own dog walking business is probably the low light of your career, and but if we become more positive about it, what has been the highlight of your careers thus far?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I would certainly say that was losing my job was certainly one of my lows. I mean, I've had, quite a few lows, but it was definitely a very low point for me because, as I said, I think we often attach, I guess, our identity to our jobs and what we do and our sense of self-worth and value. So I didn't quite know what to do with myself when I lost my job. And also it really sort of triggered a lot of mental health sort of issues for me. I'd say I was kind of probably quite depressed for about 2-3 months of my life. I say that sort of very openly and because I feel like it's not something that as a Black woman, I would say we often talk about mental health and well-being. We're always sort of forced to sort of, culture says, be strong, be the strong Black woman. But actually, I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to say that out loud 6-7 years ago. But being the person that I am today, actually, I sort of wear that as a badge of honor in a way, because if I hadn't hit that low point, I probably wouldn't have been the person that I am today. I probably wouldn't have achieved a lot of the things that I've achieved in my career so far. And what it enabled me to do is just to really redefine kind of who I was, what my confidence was, what my value was, what I really wanted to get out of my career going forward. And I would also say, more importantly, it was a point for me where I really started to find my voice. And by that, I mean, I'm the person that probably kind of has, I would like to say, likes to make a difference in the world. I get very sort of triggered by, sort of injustice in the world or in general, whether it's in personal life or work life. But I didn't always necessarily have that confidence to raise my voice when I see things that aren't necessarily kind of right in the workplace or whatever the case might be. So it really gave me the opportunity to find my confidence. And I then just realized actually that I just wanted to be much more intentional about my next job. How can I make a difference, not only in my day-to-day, my skill set in the function that I'm working in as an expert, but also how do I make a difference beyond that, to make a great place for people like myself to sort of work and be their full selves to work as well and just be their best selves. So it was a low point, but also, as I say, it really was one of those kind of moments that when I look back on it now, honestly, I wouldn't change it for the world. I'd go through it again because it really enabled me to just recalibrate, really dig deep and sort of just tap into a lot of resilience that sometimes you don't realize you have until you hit a bit of a low point in your life. And I also got to start my own business. I'd never done that before, so that was a really good skill to learn. So yeah, absolutely loved it. And I guess in terms of a highlight, I mean, I'd say I've certainly had quite a few highlights in my career. I mean, thinking about maybe something most recent, as I mentioned earlier at the start, that I, alongside my day-to-day job, I also chair our ethnicity colleague network group at MTVH called Rise. And I've been doing that for about 2 years or so. And again, one of the reasons I decided to be part of Rise, not necessarily, I didn't start off as a chair, I was just an ambassador. I was the girl that used to put up posters for events and, talking about and recruiting people to join, because it was a really great way of kind of being embedded into a culture and having a sense of community, to sort of be around like-minded people and also just build some skills around events and all sorts of things. But it was a real sense of community. So, I've since obviously kind of moved and developed into chairing the colleague network group. So I would say that this year, and I'm sure you probably know this, we had the first ever G15 Ethnicity Awards, and MTVH Rise were nominated in one of the categories. I'm really pleased to say that with all the hard work that staff colleague network groups do, sometimes in not that necessarily being recognised within the organisations across the board, in the value that we add, it was really, really wonderful to win the award, not only to be nominated, but to win the award, because there was quite a lot of really great housing associations doing amazing things. And sometimes, I guess, doing the work, which is all voluntary, you don't necessarily always realise actually the impact that you're having. So for that to be, you know, recognized by the judges, that was really, really fantastic. And to add a bit of an icing on the cake, I was also asked to host, or to be one of the co-hosts for the awards, which is a really, really kind of a big deal for me, because as much as I you know, people often get this confused about myself, that I kind of, you know, you're really confident. It's like, not really. No, I'm more like a duck, you know, puddling on the inside, but cool on the outside. And you know, I'd probably spent the last kind of year or two, like most people, talking on screens, and sort of the event was obviously in person, and being in front of a large group of people. I think there was about 200 or 250 odd people. That was quite nerve-wracking in itself, and I'd never hosted, you know, an event in front of a large group of people. So it's really great. That went really, really well, better than I expected, and got lots of positive feedback. And as I say, you know, winning the award as well was fantastic. So I would probably say that's one of my highlights for this year, and I'll probably cherish that forever. And it's really just yeah, wonderful to have been part of the first ever G15 awards in that way.
That's so good, Violet. And I can't say how much I appreciate your honesty and openness, you know, about your own struggles and your mental health issues, and also, you know, the amazing things you're doing around equality, diversity, inclusion. It's really heartwarming to hear. The sector's come under quite a bit of criticism in some ways for being quite self-congratulatory, because of all these awards we hold, and they tend to end up in very expensive dinners and events. But actually, I think the heart of the awards, and the reason that we want to celebrate the great work that people do, is precisely to inspire each other, and to actually attack the thing you mentioned earlier, which was the stigma you felt when you looked at social housing as a sector. Have you found now that that original kind of stigma that you thought attached to the sector that put you off applying and working with us, do you feel that was misplaced now? And what do you think of the sector now?
Oh, that's a really great question. And I 100% my viewpoint has changed. And I would say that I think that's largely just to the fact that generally feeling that just housing associations are evolving with the times. And I feel like that, you know, I work as a digital marketing manager, and you know, part of my role is to promote shared ownership, you know, which is a really fantastic initiative that enables first-time buyers to get on the ladder. And I think that because of that need for housing associations to have that as part of their service offering, it forces housing associations to become much more forward-driven and commercialized. And I think that because of that then enables us to really kind of have our customer service at the heart of everything that we do, to be much more innovative, to embrace tech and digital platforms, to really actually start to kind of compare, you know, thinking about the job that I do on a day-to-day basis, to even, I'd say, compete with the likes of estate agents, or to be as good as estate agents in that sense. And, you know, so that people don't look at housing associations as a kind of second best, but actually as a first option when they're thinking of buying a home, particularly, or whether that would be with social housing. So in answer to your question, I feel like definitely my perception was definitely misplaced, but I do feel that certainly in the last 6 or 7 years that I've been working here, there's definitely been a shift around that part of housing associations. But I also feel like there's definitely a shift as well, and I don't necessarily think this is unique to housing, but just around diversity and inclusion. But I feel like more so within housing, because we've always been very diverse, but we've never really kind of had a microscope around how do we make that really meaningful, not only for the people that work within the organizations, but also for our customers, to make sure that we're as inclusive as we can be, to make sure that we're offering equal opportunities, and to just be really representative of the communities that we serve, and also particularly kind of when it comes to senior leadership positions. So I love housing associations. Like, as I say, I feel really at home. Honestly, it's one of the best things I've ever done. Somebody once said to me that, you know, once you get into housing, you get the bug and you don't ever want to leave. I sort of definitely feel that way, and I've been ever since recruiting a few people who've also transitioned from private sector into housing, and they absolutely love it as well. And people are so nice here, and I know that sounds very cliche, but I really mean it very authentically. I think genuinely when you work in the housing associations, people are really passionate about what they do because they can see the difference of what they're doing, which I think sometimes can be a bit far removed, or it's all just commercially focused in other sort of sectors, whereas housing feels very, very different. We're making a difference to people's lives, so people care about what they do.
So while you've got this voice, what else would you like to say to the sector to make sure that we are the very best we can be going into the future?
Oh, another great question. I think that probably one of the things that I feel really strongly about is the diversity and inclusion piece, because I feel like as I mentioned before, in housing, we are really, really best placed to sort of make almost lead the way, I would say, lead the charge ahead of other sectors, because we are very diverse as a sector. And I think it's for me, and I'm sure I speak for lots of people, sometimes a bit disappointing just how much progress that we have made over the last few years or so. And I feel like we probably should have been way ahead more than we are now. And by that, I mean, it's not only just about creating more opportunities for particularly underrepresented groups, I would say, in senior leadership positions, in board positions. It's not just about that, but I think it's also about culture. How do we kind of do more to be much more inclusive, to be anti-racist, not only within the culture internally, but also for our customers. And it sort of feels like we are best placed to sort of really spearhead the charge on that, and to really do something that's transformational and sustainable. With that being said, I also, and I think, fair to say, over the last 2 years or so, with George Floyd and everything, and I feel like that has obviously been a catalyst for many sectors, including housing, for us to do more, to really make a real difference from that point of view. So that's been fantastic. But I would like to think that collectively, particularly because MTVH is a G15 member, it would be really great for us collectively as a G15 to lead the charge, and for other housing associations outside of that to follow, and also for other sectors to follow as well. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question directly, but I feel like there's a lot more, less talking, more acceleration of change, because it feels sometimes like the pace of change is too slow, and I just, for the life of me, still can't understand why. We're still sort of a bit hesitant, or sometimes it might feel in I guess, and I say this not only from my own personal experience, but also as a chair of a colleague network group within a housing association, that we sort of spend a lot of our time talking about what we're going to do, but we're not doing it fast enough. So how do we kind of accelerate that really in a much faster way? So yeah, that'll be my answer, I would say. And I think bring everybody along. It's not just black and brown people. Bring our allies, and I think we need to really start thinking about future generations, and also I think really leaning into a younger generation of leaders as well, because they're going to be the ones that are kind of leading in the future. How do we sort of bring them along on that journey as well, to really make a difference?
That's very, very, very insightful.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I just want to explore further the points you've made. What do you think is stopping us? Because when you take into account all the points you've talked about, we've got a very powerful history. I mean, a lot of us are inspired by people that are contrarians, innovators, that set up a lot of this housing association. I mean, whenever I speak to people, I encourage them to read the history of social housing, to see the sort of giants that were inspired, contrary to what was happening in society, to set up housing association. And you go closer to where you've worked in the past, in terms of things like Rackman in West London, and all the things, housing associations that were set up to address. And as recently in the early 90s, people don't know this, but there was a number of housing associations that sent a number of colleagues to help build up the housing sector in South Africa. So and then you talk about post riots, a lot of us in Liverpool, all this sort of path training, all this. So it's a very rich history of an housing sector. So everything is there, the social purpose. We see all the right things. We're nice people when we meet, but for whatever reason, we've not been able to move forward and back all those good intentions with reality. So what do you think is holding us back? Because I just seen all the ingredients. I can't see why. What's holding us back, really?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think yeah, as you say, there's so much, history steeped in social housing and what we do, and it's just a real shame that it doesn't feel like we're moving it as fast as we should. I mean, I'm not sure I had the right answer, but I think a few. I think it's so complex, really. But a few things that come to mind. I feel like. Some of this is, let's be honest, nobody likes change. Who likes change, right? Because it's hard work. It takes a lot of effort, and not everybody's going to be kind of coming along on that journey. And I think certainly when it comes to equality, race, diversity, inclusion, and the sort of complexity in that in itself, and in all of the, I guess I want to say the trauma as well that's in all of that. It really is just it's quite heavy. But I would like to think that I think sometimes it's just I guess maybe a hesitancy around the amount of work that might be involved to make some of these changes. I think even resource that's involved as well to make sure that we are fully equipped within each organization to make some of these changes. And I think also some of it is obviously underpinned by systemic challenges as well, and it's not just within the individual organizations or institutions, and that takes a long time to do, because we can make changes within each of our sort of cultures in the organization, but there'll be the wider society as well, which I think kind of always sort of needs to be aligned, or at least moving in some sort of synergy in some shape or form. But that takes time, right? And I think also that, I mean, I just think that I don't have the right answer, but I do strongly believe all it takes is just one housing association. All it takes is one to lead the charge and really challenge the status quo. And I think that it shouldn't be about sometimes bringing everybody along the journey, but actually, lead the charge and set the pace, and everybody else will follow.
This has been such a joy. I mean, I was thinking we might struggle with 20 minutes, but we whizzed through just over an hour in no time at all. And I think we could have carried on speaking because, you've been so honest, so open. And do you know what? This is going to be such an important interview, because I can think of so many people just in my organisation who will love listening to you and will feel valued, inspired. Everything you've said about your love for social housing and your career and your passion around equality and diversity is just amazing. You are definitely a leader of the future. Yeah. As I've said before, nothing can hold you back.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Honestly, I really, really enjoyed it.
Great stuff.
Fantastic. Okay.